I have run across so many times the classic concept in mysticism that what the avatar is to come back repeatedly to do the same thing, to renew truth when it has decayed. And that's a wonderful thing, of course, for the avatar to do. And we have all of the traditions about how he always has the John and the Peter and so on, and that he has, let's say, the same problems to deal with, the same tools, not quite the same circumstances, but that he is repeating a pattern. And I just have to be honest with you, at some point, maybe a year or two ago, I began to go into complete rebellion. It did not correspond to what I had observed of being around MeherBaba through the years, that he was repeating essentially the same time-old ancient pattern that the avatar goes through and goes through and goes through. And so I began to think, somewhere or another, the avatar in that concept of how creation goes on is in a straitjacket. And I could not conceive the MeherBaba that I had known and experienced being in a repetitive straitjacket. He was always so vital and fresh and new and creative. And so when this particular intuition swept over me, I said, good heavens, if this is true, the avatar is not in a straitjacket. He is enormously, creatively challenged, newly, each time he comes by the new parts of the infinite pattern of consciousness that the new drop souls are creating. And if it's not, let's say, just some pattern that is already created and all they're doing is pouring some solution on it to bring out the photograph, what an enormously exciting picture that is. And something like that corresponds to what I'm sure I've seen Baba doing, supervising something that is always new, challenging, and creative. I felt so good about it. And then when I had that experience, as it were, of God's infinite tenderness of what the drop soul has to do, it just swept over me. So, I don't know, this was an intuition. Now we've got to take, I think, realistically, a real look at what is intuition. People like the word enormously, and is it just sort of automatically the voice of God within us, or what is it? And if it is the voice of God, does it come through pretty straight, or have we got a few bits of problematicalness here and there that maybe we've got to look out for and do a bit of work? You know, this old word that Baba kept using when I was around him, and it meant so much to me realistically, work. So we got some work to do in relation to intuition. So, Mr. Pillar, go ahead. Would you tell me and the people here what you think about intuition? What does intuition mean to you? Just be simple and direct with us. If it sounds good or sounds bad, just get it out.
For me, there's this little, not of like a voice you hear, but like a little intelligible message that's sort of in the background, that if you're very quiet and you're very still, and somehow I just know that it's there, but to hear it, and to be, not with my ears, but to just kind of sense that is what is present. It's once you kind of sense it or hear it, it's kind of like a pattern. It's kind of like a forest that's always been there, but you haven't seen it because it's just been kind of part of the background. The presence is usually has so great a force for me that the acknowledgement of it is virtually irresistible. That this needs to be, for whatever reason, or heard. That's what it's been like for me.
Could I go to the opposite end of the room and ask Charlie Morton who's one of our other good old stalwarts. And Charlie, what does intuition seem like to you, to have another voice here?
Intuition is natural. What Baba, to me, it's what Baba expects of me. In other words, I know right from wrong. Intuition is right there in front of me all the time. I know that it's the natural point of his always being there with me. I didn't have to contemplate in my mind who Baba was when I first heard his name. I knew who he was. That is intuition to me. Intuition is something that somehow it's coming through me, but it's him. It's completely him. It's as if you cut the whole top half of me off. Everything inside is Baba. And coming in touch with the intuition is coming in touch with Baba, who is actually getting rid of the mononash, is losing not the brain, not the intelligence, not any of that, but all the desires, the elements that keep me isolated from the intuition, which is Baba, which is Baba's voice within me, which is what, when we say Baba's voice, what is Baba's voice? Baba is the individual inside. Baba is everything within one. And yet it's opening up that jar and letting Baba flow freely out of one. It's losing the cap, so to speak. It's turning the hat inside out, as Baba would say.
So it relates, as far as you're concerned, directly to your relationship and, let's say, communication with Baba himself.
Correct.
Put it in that.
Correct.
What would you say, Ed?
To me, it's the image of a tuning fork, that all the individual drop souls are like tuning forks that suddenly vibrate in unison with the main tuning fork, and that intuition is given.
That's an unusual one. Very unusual. Very beautiful, too. Well, I think we have three really wonderful ones here. Can I chime in now with a fourth Don Stevens, the way it looked to me when Baba said that in Mondley Hall? Incidentally, he repeated it again. I don't know whether it was several months or even several years later, but on a second occasion he said exactly the same thing, that my avatar gift to humanity is that of intuition, as Jesus Christ's gift was love, as Muhammad's was the ability or the laws that govern communal living. And then he went on to Krishna, and that's the one that I forgot. And everybody said, "Good heavens, Stevens, you didn't take any notes?" And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I'm not a note taker." But I'll ask Baba, but I was ashamed to. And so a couple of years later, he brought it up again and went through them and got to Krishna. I said, how could I have ever forgotten that? So I went back to San Francisco, and Baba then said to Krishna, oh gosh, I've forgotten it again. So what it is, if you ever hear what Baba said for Krishna, why, please let me know. But the thing is, I wanted to be quite honest with you. This was so earth-shaking what Baba was saying. I immediately said, thank God, because now when the avatar leaves human form, through an intuitive process, certainly we will be able to stay somewhere or another in reasonable touch with him. That's what it meant to me. So that was my wonderful conclusion. Ed, you got your hand.
Also, as big a jump as it was between sensation and reason from the animal to human form, the jump from reason to intuition is that big a jump.
Yeah.
And just as sensation needs sometimes, just as logic is going to have to be used with intuition. The same way sensation is used with reason.
Wait a minute until I comment on that, because it's so central, and actually you've anticipated the second part of what Baba said on each of these occasions after he finished off with whatever Krishna did for us. And then he went on to say, now, you must understand that intuition will become the principal tool for humankind and its endeavors and its activities, including the disciplines of science, architecture, things of that sort. And you should not feel, however, that the use of intuition as the principal decision maker or guide to modern living, that this will mean the discarding of logic. He said, you must understand that the intuitive answer must be rechecked by careful reasoning and study. Now, this is important. So after Baba said this, I just frankly had assumed that this might have been maybe the 10th or the 100th time that he had said my avatar gift is intuition. And I've been running around hither and yon for some years now talking about Baba's avatar gift of intuition. And I think it was only 2-3 years ago that when I was with the group in Seattle, Lance Bonington, whom I got to know quite well and to respect tremendously, said to me when he was driving me from the airport, and he said, well, Don, I just have to be honest with you, and we know each other well enough so I can be. When you talked about intuition being Baba's avatar gift, it was the first time I ever heard it or read it. He said, I bring this up because I think I'm fairly well read. I've tried to make a point of reading just about everything that Baba has ever said and that's been published. And he said also, I've tried to be conscientious in going to India and meeting Mandali and talking with them and listening to things that they say are important. But you, yes, I've heard about intuition and where it fits into the scheme and it's increased you, but I have never heard anyone or read any words that say that that is Baba's avatar gift to humanity and that it would be the principal tool, etc., etc. Well, he stunned me. I just couldn't believe it. I was absolutely dead certain that Purdom had written about it somewhere in the God-Man, and that the Hopkinsons had written about it and so on, and that Harish had discussed it many times in Mandali Hall. And so I began to make my own researches. I couldn't find it. And I talked to 2 or 3 of the Mandali, and he said, well, Baba's always talked about enhanced use of intuition, but we never heard him say that it was his avataric gift and that it would become the principal tool of civilization. So they confirmed it. But I just have to tell you that I couldn't have made up that story because there's still too many people living around the times that I discussed it when I got back to San Francisco, including one of the top early students of Carl Jung, who listened to my story and said, well, Don, that was a fascinating story, because I've done quite a good bit of research on the word love as it was used, the context before and after Christ, and there's a distinct difference involved. So it makes great sense to me. And also, when I was talking about this for the first time in Marseille, I remember this good professor of mechanical engineering from the University of Marseille who said to us all sitting there, well, Don, I just have to say that the last 2-3 years in my courses in engineering, I have found an enormous difference that has occurred increasingly of 1 or 2 or 3 students when I give them a complex problem, which used to take the students hours to work through the intricacies of their calculations to come up with the answer. There are nowadays at least 1 or 2 or 3 students who know the answer instantly. And then when they check it through, they find it is correct. So this means I take Baba's statement very, very literally. So unfortunately, for better or for worse, apparently I am the only living person who sat twice in Mandali Hall and heard Baba say this. I just have to tell you, I am without confirmation by a living person. But I've got a good memory, and there's still people around who I'm sure remember when I used to say, this is what Baba said. So there we are. Now you know the strong and the weak points. But I think we've got to go into, Linda, you'd like to answer.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, Baba said that he came to bring in the age of intuition, a new age, to be the age of intuition, so.
I think Kitty is on record as having said that,
Well, Baba
reported
didn't say
that about Baba saying that. concept, yes. Somebody brought that up recently. So we may have at least partial confirmation.
Also by natural.
But nobody has reported, Kitty or anybody else, saying that Baba said it was his avatar gift, as Jesus Christ was so-and-so, meaning this great central thing. Yes, Mabu?
Can we also say that, just referring to the beautiful experience that you had, from the intuition that you just actually described, is the way that the avatar contacting us. So it's in a way, it's our relationship in this element with him, where he guides us.
Well, this is a very key important point you bring up, Mabu. I don't want to cut you off. Finish off, please.
So some of us might have that experience that the less that we do I, mine, and so forth, and the more that we do him, and it's only him, and have more love for him, the more we feel him within us, within our heart, the bottom of the heart, and his guidance, and so forth.
I think this is certainly one of the most important considerations that we can bring up, must bring up, and take a very careful look at. Because certainly, as I said to you, as soon as Baba said that, Mandali Hall, I immediately said, this then certainly is a road open for our continuing contact after he has dropped the body.
The internet.
The internet. The internet. The avatar internet. But I think you started to. Did you slightly raise your hand, or you were just looking? Did you have something to add?
I think that you wanted to address around appearances of Baba to close Mandali, which is, I think, similar to our inner experience, where we may feel that Baba wants us to do something, or Baba's giving us some kind of message, and there's this sense of, well, how do you prove what you're experiencing?
Can I take 2 minutes and just sketch an anatomical concept of Don Stevens? This is pure Don Stevens. I have pictured for quite a long time the human being as consisting of something, let's say, like 3-4 bodies in a row vertically. The top part is drop soul, God, avatar, MeherBaba, all meaning the same thing. They are the same thing finally. So that, in turn, associated with, joined to, in my mind, quite frankly, with a mental body, which is a body of energy, but the most refined energy in creation. The mental body goes on and persists, as Baba says it does, when we drop the physical body. And it is the storage point, Baba points out, for the samskaras, and also what he calls the inherited wisdom. And if you never remember reading that in the discourse, go back and study it, because that's terribly important in relation to intuition. Because Baba says this is one of the most important resources for our intuitions. Just briefly putting what inherited wisdom is that when we drop our physical body, go to the astral, make this review, go through very intensively a re-experiencing of it. It's something as if, and these are Don's words now, like the burning out of the dross, and we're just left with the refined part of the experience that we've gone through. And secondly, we experience emotionally much stronger than we did when we were in the physical body. And then secondly, it is retained, Baba says, and it is stored in the mental body. And so very often when all of a sudden we think, oh, I really should do so-and-so, it is because our refined wisdom of this sort of an experience, which has been stored in the mental body, comes through. So this is an important source of intuition. Certainly, the one that we hope we are tapping into comes from the drop soul, Baba, God part of our own self. But then, also involved in the mental body, and we just got to take a look at this nightmare, are the mass of samskaric energy stored from our own experiences, which is where desires and so on come from. Now, if you have, and excuse me, we've got to go into physics for a moment now, but if you remember anything about electricity, magnetic fields, and things of that sort, if you have something passing by a very strong energy source, that strong energy source is going to have some effect on what is going by. So if we've got the drop soul, Baba, God, mental body joined to it some way by a communicating system, subtle body joined some way by a communicating system, and finally a physical body associated into all of this, joined by what I call something like a spinal cord. I call it the vertical line of communication, as the communication from the top most wonderful pure source goes by the mental body, and if it is going by a storage point of an awful lot of energy, it's not going to go by there without some effect being produced on it. And this, in my mind, is what people way back in the 20s and the 30s, when they had mediums and Ouija boards and a lot of things like that, called unconscious or subconscious coloring. A coloring of the message. For them, here's a medium and here's an outside entity where's somewhere in something like paradise trying to get a message through. And certainly they were honest enough and wise enough at that time of knowing that there's some mediums who are pretty good, and there's some mediums who end up with just an awful lot of so-called coloring, their own subconscious material involved. So I think if we're going to be beginning honest with ourselves, have to look at the possibility that even a top-notch, top-story impulse of intuition coming by the mental body can be subjected to certain things. Here is the danger. And I've got enough experience now in my own life and observation to know this happens. And it happens much more often than we give it any credit for. And we almost have no way of knowing. We asked our top-notch Jungian expert, who's a pillar in the Teaching Jungian Institute of London, Nora, is there any way that even the closest people to Baba can have, let's say, an intuition from Baba without it being subjected to their own unconscious coloring? She said there is absolutely no way, in her opinion. And she is the top expert that we have in that field in London. So this means something to me, and I just got to back it up by everything I know. Ken, what were you going to add?
Does that pose a problem for the person receiving the intuition, or just if he shares it with others?
No, it means you, yourself. When it comes to your conscious mind, it has come through this mind field.
Sure.
And it may have been considerably damaged.
But does that...
And then if you pass it on to somebody else,
okay,
you run the risk that you've passed on a damaged product.
sure, okay.
Yes,
I
Adele.
was thinking that we all reason with different mechanisms of visualization and how we do reason.
Sure.
And for myself, it's very unsophisticated, actually.
Mhm.
It's based on basically what Baba said. You lead with the heart. The heart determines the end, and this little mind, much of it we have, devises the means, and never confuse those means with that end. And therefore, that's the big thing. What truly, I think, a priori discussion of intuition is very necessary to have. What are we talking about when we talk about the heart?
Wonderful.
And the heart, of course, is terribly manipulated and misused. As you say, all these emotions, and people say, that's my heart, and so forth. Well, the reasoning is, I'm waiting, for you to show us how to really have, at this process of discrimination between heart and
That's a wonderful word, discrimination.
I need to know
That's necessary.
the reasoning function. Extremely important, but there is a school of, as you noticed, I just want to mention this quickly, I just like you've done, I have marveled at the the new way, so to speak, the new generation, how they go more immediately, Dawn, from the heart to the head instead of that trip backwards from the head to the heart. And I have noticed too that because that is so prevalent, outside there's this wonderful development among true scientists that come from that planet to learn about the heart, as Papa tells us, the planet where they are more intellectual. And they come here to learn about the heart, and many of them bring with that, apparently, so many wonderful cosmic pictures, like what fascinates me is this whole idea of the holographic universe, which of course pertains to how we accept this wholeness. This, you know, it helps me in linking up to my neighbor by knowing that we are together. I mean, we're just we're holographic in every single cell. And so that is, but the other aspect that has come in along with each generation is a school of thought. Kathy and I have read this, it's called Heart Math. And these are people that deal with high corporate industry and all, and they show them where their thinking is too heavily based on ratiocination or whatever. It's based on the heart first. They show them that in current terms. So I think the heart, as I say, the heart is very important.
Certainly
To
is.
explain what we mean by the heart in intuition.
Well, we certainly have to take out these key words and examine them very carefully and be very cool-headed and try our best to sort our emotions out from the whole picture and see what is actually involved. But I think one of the things that most people who are, let's say in Baba groups, who are trying to work with the word intuition and some of the problems, excuse me, I keep trying to work and figure out is what can I personally do to minimize the coloring of a true intuition, regardless where that coloring is coming from. How can I go about it? How can I be honest? How can I protect myself in good intuitions? And certainly, I want you to know that there was a group that started out in actually a discussion in Atlanta about 3 years ago on intuition, and Baba's gift of intuition to mankind. And they said, well, this is so terribly important that we really need to sit down and try to put our thoughts together on what is it? What are the resources of intuition? Is all intuition from one place, or does it come from several places? And what are the dangers involved? So they've gone through 2 or 3 meetings together and decided, well, best thing is, because there are a lot of people who talk about intuition, but there's very, very little that is written so far in good literature on it, and certainly very little in Baba literature on the subject of intuition consistently. So they said, why don't we try to pool our thoughts and our creativity and write a little book, a preliminary book on intuition, some of the principles and some of the dangers that are involved, maybe somewhere we can go. And incidentally, they're pretty close to putting that into print. Ecology's going to print it, he says, in India for the group, and there's some awfully good people involved in it. So these are Baba, dedicated Baba people. Yes, Ed?
I believe that this is the natural intellectual approach that we, before we've had the experience, but that when Baba gives the gift of intuition to humanity, which we maybe reach.
Baba says he has given it. It will be the principal tool of the existing.
Flowers, really flowers in the body of humanity. We'll know
And what
what
if
the
it's already
experience-
flowering yet?
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
in the
convinced
body
it
of
is.
humanity, what I mean by that is when people are really aware that they're communicated on a completely different level than they were in the past.
Yeah. And
At
all
that
I'm
point,
saying
it
is
will
I
be
know a few thousand
experience.
people who do feel that way.
But
right
it's
now.
not across the entire human race yet.
Baba said it would be available to all of humanity, not
But when
just the
that
spiritual.
does dawn, that morning dawns, it will be an experience we won't have to intellectualize.
I'm not gonna wait for it, I think it is already done.
It has
Yeah, I really do
been,
feel it.
it's
This
already
is important.
here. Long time
Yes,
ago.
Nancy, you're
Well,
first
I
here.
think, I mean, I certainly notice in my life many times a day, and I think we all do, to where, you know, all of a sudden you think of somebody and they call.
Mhm.
Or you'll call somebody and they say, oh my gosh, you just flashed into my mind. And I mean, this just happens all the time. And I think this is part of this whole changeover. I mean, I know I've seen some of the cable television I hadn't seen in 16 years, and I took the email address down and I emailed it, but it must have been 3 months later. And by the time I did that, the email address was discontinued. But the night after I sent it, I happened to be in the ladies' room of the Directors Guild or something, and she calls my name, and I hadn't seen this person in 60 years. I was just absolutely blown away. I mean, it's like maybe the intuition, serendipity that kind of just, you know, that I think everyone experiences that. Much, much more than, you know.
Can I continue a little bit with this resources for intuition that we were sort of getting out? I think we all hope and feel that intuitions are primarily from our own drop soul God, MeherBaba aspect of our own vertical body, you might say, composition. And then Baba himself says also that one of the principal resources of intuition, this is right in his own handwriting, comes from the inherited wisdom of our previous reincarnations, essentialized and distilled. So that's the second one. But that comes from, yes, that it is the essentialized experiences from our previous reincarnations. And that is stored, he says, in the mental body and is a principal resource for our intuition. This is direct Baba, but that is certainly not direct drop soul, unadulterated by any contact with the dream of creation. And then I just have to be realistic. And I don't know how many times in my life I've been around somebody who has said to me, Don, I had a wonderful intuition, so-and-so and so-and-so, and it's so exciting, I'm going to try it out. And they go off and I see them 6 weeks later and I say, well, how'd the intuition work out? Some of the times they've said, it was just absolutely wonderful. It was one of the most wonderful things ever happened to me. And on other occasions, the person says, well, I'm afraid I have to say it was a bad intuition. And it worked out very badly. So, in other words, there apparently are situations in which we get all excited about it. We say, oh boy, the little voice was up there and it was so clear and it was so exciting. And you follow it out and it just gets all messed up and chaos results from it. Now this has caused me to say, without our being willing, usually, to identify it, our own mental body stored samskaras with their energy wake up when a situation comes along that is coded with it. And suddenly we get a tremendous impulse and we say, I've had an intuition. But how can we, let's say, tell ourselves that whether that did or did not come from an associated samskara, and we misidentify it? So I simply have to say that if we're going to be honest with this subject, we have to say that when something comes through the barrier from the subconscious to the conscious mind, we do not know the source from which it came, which of three rather different sources. And I would even add a fourth to it. And here we really get into a mare's nest, and that is everything that I know from my own past experience, from being close to people who are mediumistic. There is also the possibility that this vertical spinal column of communication, which is us, integrating us, can be broken, and an outside entity can come in and put something through this particular circuit. And everything that I know about mediumship says this exists. And also everything that I've ever found out, principally back in the 30s and 40s from people who were deeply involved in mediumistic fields, honest, intelligent people have always said, when this happened, two things. There is a certain amount of coloring. Suppose you've got a good entity who's pretty sincere and who is pretty intelligent and trustworthy, is trying to get a message through. It still comes through your own unconscious mind with all of its claptrap of sans cares. And they recognized it and they said, coloring is a problem. Some mediums are terrific and some have a lot of personal coloring that's involved. That's one danger. And you don't know. You don't know, frankly. Secondly, again, I think one of the most beautiful descriptions of a very, very... What's that? Oh, are you talking to yourself again, Adele? We're going to have to put her under a vow of silence. Adele, you got to listen to me. This is important what's going on here. She's smiling, so it's all right. So one of the things that Madam Mrs. Alston, who was a great friend of Merchant of Mark, a great friend of Ivy Dew's, she was easily the world's great astrologer during her day. The Pope and the Vatican gave her permission after she graduated from the University of Uppsala to come personally to the Vatican Library and research from the Vatican's own resources on astrology. She had access to resources that had never been touched. Anyway, she explained to me, she said, Don, when we start talking about mediumship, you must understand, people have somewhere or another to understand that our own makeup is something, let's say, like a good solid chair with arms and legs and so on. When you go into a mediumistic situation, your normal internal line of communication is interrupted, broken into. And it's something as if the chair that you are had been given a kick in the leg and it got busted. Okay, all right, well, that's not fatal usually. You can get out some good wood glue, put it back together again. It'll be pretty serviceable. Okay, gets busted again somewhere or another. A little kid has been careless in handling it. And so it's broken the second time. You get out the wood glue and you glue it back together. But you find out that the second time that it's broken, it isn't quite as strong as the first time that you repaired it. Then you do it 10 or 15 or 20 times, and you have got a very fragile chair with not a great deal of strength on your hands. And she said, this is what happens inevitably in mediumistic reception, when outside sources deliberately allowed to come in and use your vocal cords, your body, and so on. So she said, and this is also something that this old fellow Dr. Rittenhouse emphasized to me. He said, when people do this too frequently, there is a permanent damage to their own internal communication system. And you'll notice two things. First of all, they will start getting rather pale in their complexion. Second thing is they start looking rather puffy. Third thing, they start being sort of absent, as it were, in situations. And this can become more and more serious. So, you see, one has to be terribly careful, above all, if something is likely to damage your own internal line of communication. And I am convinced personally, this is why Baba has said emphatically, clearly, that the avatar and the perfect ones almost always lead the devotee under the veil, and rarely, if ever, or very rarely, give any sort of a psychic experience to the individual. I think we have to take Baba seriously. And as we're discussing intuition and its resources and where these various things come from, this is where we have to be on the alert. And above all, with our own selves. Let's not kid ourselves on it. When Baba says something that clearly, that definitively, we've got to take him to heart on it. It's for our own good. And if we're going to be good Baba tools, so that he in turn can use us, as he says in the last message on the alphabet board, we've got to take this doubly seriously. Can I be more emphatic than that? I feel strongly about this. I've seen too many terribly, terribly good people gradually weaken and eventually do real harm to themselves and very little good to other people when they misunderstand this. I'm sorry that I've been preaching here at this particular time. Where are we? We got 5 minutes to go now. Yes, Nancy.
What you said, when you said you've seen very many people, are those people you mean that acted as mediums or psychics allow themselves to be used?
Yes, deliberately, professionally. And I've noticed that. I've known 2 or 3 very good commercial mediums. And I've also known 1 or 2 people whom I love dearly for their tremendous love of Baba, and who have to feel that they're constantly in contact with Baba. And even there, I have to say, I've watched with great distress the gradual deterioration of their physical and mental functions. It is sad to see. I get really, really sad. I love them to pieces. But way back there.
Well, wasn't Mershida was a good astrologer?
Well, she was a lousy astrologer, but she was awfully good in other fields. But Mershida really had a great penchant for occult happenings.
But
She loved them.
She gave me such good advice from my chart. She gave me such good advice from my chart that I followed and it worked out so nicely.
Good, wonderful. And she certainly had 1 or 2 of the very, very best astrologers in America at her service. And they did awfully good work on charts. But then you just have to say, what is the final function of the chart? I tell you one thing, because I was there at the time, when Meherji had sold his rug business in Persia, and he comes back to India, and Baba says, "Oh, you're back here?" And he said, "Well, yes, I sold my rug business." "Well, why'd you sell it?" And he said, "Well, I went to my astrologer, and he said this is exactly the right time to sell it." And he did, and he got a good price, and after that the rug business fell apart. But what did Baba say to him? He said, "You went to an astrologer, but I am your astrologer." Well, you know, he got a good price out of it, but Baba said, "Now be careful, Meherji." And he never went to an astrologer again. I think there was way back, oh God, we've got so many hands, we've got to have 2 more days just to cover the comments. Way over to the right. My right and your left. You. You're it. You're
I'm
it.
George.
Go ahead.
Do you know about Rupert Sheldrake?
Oh, it doesn't ring a bell. You
Okay,
tell me.
he's got a new book out called The Sense of Being Stared At, and it's about intuition. And he's
Good.
very, he's an Oxford scholar and a scientist. And his last book, a physicist, but didn't he also study psychology?
He used to be a companion of Krishnamurti's.
Well, that's pretty good companionship, isn't
But
it?
and the book before that I had read, I think you'll enjoy the title. It's called How Does Your Dog Know You're Coming Home?
Well, I guess that got a few sales, didn't it?
I don't think they're big sellers, but before
They're
you were saying,
provocative.
I don't know who's thinking about intuition, but they are out there thinking about it. Scholars, not just, quick. He's not a big seller, he's a scholar.
Well, more power to them. We're going to have an awful lot of work done on intuition. And I think your hand was up just next there.
As a practical matter though, I mean, if I'm in my daily life, I want to draw from my intuition, what can I do for it to clear up? I mean, I really basically don't know. I have a sense and I make a decision based on it. It could be completely muddied by my samskara.
All right, let's tackle, let's say, 1 or 2 of the previous groups that have been discussing as we are today. There are 2 things that came up and were discussed at great length, and everybody thought that they were very helpful. One of them I brought up, and that was, I think, when you have an intuition, you have the right and should, sometime shortly after the intuition, open it up inside of yourself again and see what your own, I always call it my inner sentinel, the inner man. And I have the conviction that we have inside of ourselves some sort of a process, something which is stationed between the subconscious and the conscious mind, which knows what is going through and is wise enough to know what is the real truth somewhere or another. And to me, the sentinel, if I am involved in something which, first of all, I think is great, I'll look at it a little bit later on, I sort of look inside, and if I get a sense of unease, uncertainty, then I try to re-examine it, because I trust this inner sentinel function in myself. The other important point that was brought up again and again and again is that here we are in the area where a small circle of true companions united with true inner links is worth its weight in gold for what they can offer to truing your intuition. The word truing was invented by, in this sense, by the London Discourse Study Group about 20, 30 years ago, as a matter of fact. They believe deeply in the truing process, that if you're in a group where you trust people, you share things that are coming up about Baba and things that come up in your own intuitions, if you put it before them, then if your subconscious is coloring a certain part of that intuition, somebody else's subconscious is not going to be identical with yours. So if you have a circle of several people, the likelihood that you've got several other people who've got the same subconscious work as you have, which is discolored that intuition, they are almost certainly going to sense that something is haywire, rotten in Denmark. And they will bring it up honestly, hopefully diplomatically. But this is an enormously important function for a group of real companions. What do you
This
want
is
to
why
add
the
there?
12-step and drug rehab that work in groups
Yeah.
work so well.
Yeah,
Because the ego's,
absolutely. Right,
sees
same
across
thing.
the ego mechanism.
Yeah. Terrific, yeah. What would you add?
Well, following up on what Ed was just saying, it was in 1935 when Bill Wilson wrote the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, that somewhere it's said that it came from Baba, there's too many coincidences, and one of the promises is we will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us, and that's in the 30s. I wanted to ask you, I am a little baffled by what I hear in what Baba might call the bogus media, called the bogus news and newspapers, when they say counterintuitive. That's a counterintuitive thought. What is that, how does that mean?
Well, I guess I haven't been reading the right newspapers lately, because I don't know what counterintuitive in a media sense means.
It means it doesn't make sense. It doesn't hold up as an inner sentinel.
Okay, the inner
It goes
sentinel
against the
says
general
no.
consensus. That's usually how it's used.
Yeah.
We normally think it's red, but it's really blue.
I see. Well, that's a good sleight of hand way. I think Adele would like to tell us something. Would, no inner conversations when another person's on the floor, please.
Taken out and lead and all that. I'm sure a lot of these questions are repetitive, like Ellie's question is very universal. Which Baba discourse done? I mean, aside from the more, I should say, almost esoteric searches into intuition, what about just straight discourses of Baba's? Which would be the most pertinent? Which of Baba's writings would just hit it right on the head of Baba's writings on intuition?
None.
Which one?
None.
None. All right, but then the other question that precedes is, where does he define heart in the most gratifying way to your groups?
Oh, well.
That subject must have arisen because we like to feel that we're guided by the love which is generated in the heart more so than in the mind. The mind, we said, is there to be an instrument to use the heart's insights or intuitions, but I should say heart, I'd like the best.
Well, take Baba's statement on those two occasions. He said, intuition must be proved and checked by logic. He did not say heart. He did not. He was very specifically said, you've got to do it by the normal, rational, logical means. He was terribly clear on that.
Does he talk about heart very much? I have to say.
Certainly not when he brought up intuition those two times. I think this is where we are in danger of pushing the balance too far in another direction. We got to be careful where to apply heart and where not to apply heart. Yes, Linda.
In discourses, he says intuition is the language of the heart.
Well, okay, all right. Why shouldn't it be? But he also says,
True English.
yeah, but also when he talks about resources for it, he doesn't say intuition is the resource for it. Maybe it's the language for it, I don't know. But he's certainly where he says inherited wisdom is one of the principal resources. That is terribly clear. And he certainly says nothing about heart involved there. We've got to be careful about heart when we get intuition into the middle of the field.
What is that symbol of Scoopy's having the winged heart? How is that interpreted? The winged heart.
I think I've had that interpreted to me at least 100 times, and it's just like Baba's story that he told in Merchant of Deuce's little library. I forget it every time. It has never completely gelled with me. What do you want?
Baba says heart, doesn't he mean heart-mind balance?
He certainly, and we tried to bring up again and again, the balance, the happy mixture of head and heart.
That's heart.
Let's hold on to that.
That's heart.
This is, well, the head and the heart, the balance, the happy mixing. Yours.
Yes, you talked about the dangers of mediumship, and you know that makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
But Baba also did say don't go to psychics or astrologers as well.
He also said.
Didn't he also say? I mean, besides, you know, stay away from the mediumship stuff, but even just thinking psychics or astrologers, didn't Baba say don't do it at all to everybody? What exactly did he say?
Well, again, I just go back to the basic thing that he was very clear on, and that is the avatar and the perfect masters far prefer to lead the devotee totally under the veil, without occult experiences. End of story. Or occult stories.
Occult experiences, but that's a psychic, they're just sharing
I think you're
words.
quibbling with words then, if you try to rationalize it that way. I really do. I've got to be honest with you.
This gentleman here has his hand up for an hour. He's had his hand up a long time.
Okay, come along. I'm sorry I missed you. Let's have it.
Deja vu situations where you find yourself in a situation you have a feeling you know what's happening next, and the action, you can predict how it's going, and the moment it departs you're aware that okay, it stopped. So what is that related to intuition, deja vu, when you know how the event is going to unfold?
Well, I would assume that one is tapping into the mental body, which knows an awful lot of experiences through lifetimes and lifetimes, and that you are tapping into your own mental body and its experiences some way in this case. And those are accessible to one. But I would also caution the individual from trying to destroy the normal barrier between one's own conscious mind and that mental body stored content. There I think we start getting into dangerous ground. So I think that where you have the sense of, I've already seen this and lived it through, you are tapping into a part of your stored memories in similar types of situations. And you know the next step at that point. I'm just speculating. I really don't know. I'm not researching. Nancy, then I think we'll do one more,
Okay,
and then we're going to have to stop.
I would just like to make a comment because I thought it was absolutely fascinating that Narendra Machadal channeled
Yeah.
with us words. I mean, he ever talked to you, I mean, that was such a phenomenon. I mean, such
Sure. It's one of those red herrings that, in view of what Bob has said about psychic messages and so on, how come Norina got scot through and apparently supported by Baba? Nancy, I don't know the answer. All I know is that Baba loved Norina tremendously. I know the extraordinary love of Norina for Baba. And you remember Baba always says, I am the slave of my lovers. And I do know, and I feel very, very deeply, that Baba countenanced and loved and encouraged people who would sometimes do exactly the opposite of what he said to do. This to me is a measure of Baba's greatness and his greatness of his all-encompassing love for us. I've known this in several instances. So, one other. Charlie, you got the privilege.
Okay, this is great, because I just want to bring it back to the beginning of the program, and that was when you were introduced to Baba, Baba said, no, this, Don belongs to me, not you. You're talking to Murshid at the time.
Right.
And Baba several times said, Don, you are one of my mandali. Not just once, but several times.
Oh, he went a little further and he said to Aries, I don't mean one of the mandali, but one of the close
mandali.
Yeah.
And we know there's been other mandali in the West, such as Elizabeth and Kitty and others of that nature. But I'm just saying, it's my intuition that's telling me that we should thank Don for, or thank Baba for sending Don out here for this wonderful talk we've had for 2 days.